Guest today, um, JDM Josh D. Miller, founder of the Right Box, and today we're going to be talking about the story and the pitch. And one of the reasons that I want to talk about that is because I've run into a lot of inventors and a lot of people that have these really amazing ideas, but as they say, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter how great your idea is. You still have to be able to go out there and communicate it to people in order to get funding, in order to get customers, in order to basically grow and turn it into a successful business. And with that, I'm going to let Josh start off and introduce himself and go from there, and we'll have a discussion.
Well, what's up, everyone? Thanks so much for having me this morning. I'm really excited to be here talking with the clean tech folk. I'm a big fan of you guys, but you usually come over to my neck of the woods, and I don't often get to come over to your neck of the woods. So this is an honor and a privilege for me. So I'm stoked to be here. Yeah, I mean, I'm JDM, aka Josh David Miller. I'm also known as the shredder of business models because I have a penchant for honesty. Let's just say we'll call it that. No, I like to ask really probing questions that create focus and clarity. And I guess this is just a teasing nickname that Sacramento has decided to give me. But I probably hear around maybe 500 to 600 startup pitches every year. So I've heard amazing pitches. I've heard train wrecks. I've heard everything in between. I'm a really big fan of startups and pitching, which is why I help organize 1 Million Cups and do that every single Wednesday at 9 a.m. And I think one of the factors that often gets lost in the startup pitching process is this idea of story and what story you're telling. And so that's why I think it's great that we're talking about this here today, because if you just start out by saying like, well, I'm going to do this technical vomit of everything that's about my organization, everything about my IP and secret sauce to you, and hope that you think it's awesome enough to invest, it's probably not really gonna land that well. So I think it's a great topic to start with.
All right. So I kind of wanted to hold on one second. I kind of wanted to start with a hypothetical entrepreneur. And this hypothetical entrepreneur is Alex. And Alex has a spray coating for houses that insulates the houses better. He calls it Flex R, for increasing the R factor of houses, which is the insulation for those clean tech people out there. Now, Alex, they've got a PhD in material science. They know that this can work. And their first step is, okay, where do we go? And they go to, Clean Start or to Josh, and they say, okay, here's this really cool idea. And the first question about how do you get them start to telling a story would be, well, it's the first question that you would ask them to get them to start telling the story.
Yeah, so there's two different stories, and so it's going to depend on context. But I think the one that's going to ground everything the most, and we'll get to the other one later, but like the one that's going to ground everything the most is the story of the product, the story of the customer, the problem. And the very first thing that I would say is, well, who's your customer?
Yeah, well, and he goes, well, Mike, the customers, it's everyone.
And I go, okay, but it's not. So who's your customer, right? And so this is where when we start doing, we start talking customers, we start creating personas. And when we talk about personas, we're talking about your ideal customer persona, like your ICP is what we call that. And one of the things that that makes people really uncomfortable about the ICP is its specificity, because you need to get so specific that it makes you uncomfortable with how specific you just got, and then you want to go one level more specific. Like it's like, well, as an example, there's this old joke about specificity with your customer. It says, like, let's say you're targeting men who were born in 1949 in the greater London area, who are affluent, who are really big fans of dogs, and take their vacations in the Swiss Alps. And most people go like, well, that's awfully specific. Like that's good enough, right? For psychographic demographic, we're good here. The problem is that describes both Ozzy Osbourne and the new King Charles. So it's just not specific enough to doing things. You have to get a really uncomfortably specific. And there are lots of ways to do that. They're kind of outside the scope of just pitching and storytelling, but you want to find out what is the customer you most want to work with, who most want to work with you, and then just start with that one person.
And it's important to be able to tell the customer the story of the customer, to help people fundraise, to help people sell, kind of all the above. To what's the biggest reason that you want to be able to tell the story of the customer?
Yeah. So the reason you want to tell a story of the customer is that that's what a business is. At the end of the day, like, to be overly reductive about it, a business is solving a problem for somebody for money, and a story does two things. So one, it's a really concise, convenient, and compelling way to articulate that there's a person out there with a problem that you can solve for money. But also, just the way human psychology works, we remember stories. Stories resonate with us. We attach to stories. That's why opera is a thing. It's why television's a thing. It's why books are a thing and movies are a thing. Stories resonate with us. So if you want your story to land and stick, a story just happens to be the best way to do it, and it's what you need to convey anyway, because it's the story of your business.
All right, so Alex, they're going to kind of I'm going to try to describe their customer down to make it, that really, really specific one. The customer is a homeowner with a house that is older than the average house in California, which is older than 45 years. They own their house. They haven't had any upgrades done to it in the past 15 years. They have single pane windows, and they live in the valley in areas that don't get a lot of rain. Also, that they make $60,000 or more, and that they are a family, let's say a family with kids.
Got it. Okay, great. So that's an awesome start, because we've narrowed in on, like, there's a certain amount of money they make. We've narrowed in on geography. We've narrowed in on some of the other related demographic factors. But let's like ratchet up the psychographic factors too, because let's give this guy, this homeowner, a name.
Alex, Oh, no, Alex is let's give the homeowner a name. I keep going. I'm like, Josh, Peter, Laura, George.
Well, why don't we do a homeowner Harriet? We'll just call
homeowner
it
Harriet.
Right?
There we go.
Homeowner Harriet. All right. So we've also picked a gender, which is something else too, and that's something you want to keep in mind as well. So we have homeowner Harriet, and is she like, what is her? She has like single pane windows, and that's leading to what? Like, there's a pain there, an external pain that she has. Is her bill really high? Like, her energy bill really high? Is it she just freaking cold all the time? Like, what's the problem that causes Harriet to say, I'm looking for some type of solution?
They spend lots of money on their heating and cooling, but they do not feel the result.
Got it. All right. So it's a double whammy there.
Yeah.
My bill's high and I'm still cold in the winter and still hot in the summer. All right. Yeah. So that definitely blows. All right. So the way to think about like problems is actually like 3 levels deep. And so we start out with this external thing, these external problems, which are like, my bill is really high, and if I'm making less than 60 grand a year, like, I don't know how the geography translates to that, but it's not exactly affluent almost anywhere. So like, money is probably a factor anyway. There's probably some budget involved, and they're spending all this money and still not getting results. So those are big external the big external pains, money and discomfort, and those translate into an internal pain. That internal pain is also really important, and that's going to be your thing, like, that produces frustration, it produces anxiety, it produces jealousy, right? If you like, the house down the street, like, they're always telling me, like, every time I go in there, it's nice and cool, and they tell me they spend $80 a month on their electric bill or whatever, for that, and they got the solar panels on the roof, like, whatever. There's going to be some of those types of internal pain. So we want to get from the external pain to the internal pain, because it resonates more with people, and also because if the internal pain, in addition to resonating with people, is actually going to be your strongest signal for whether customers are willing to buy at all. So if you're just saying, I'm going to save you money, but they don't care about the money, like, let's say you're going to save Warren Buffett $500 a month on a bill, that's nothing. Like, it doesn't matter to him at all. That money is right. But if you're making, 30 grand a year or something like that, saving $500 a month is kind of like all of it, right? That's like the end of the world. So so you want that's speaking to the size of the pain. So if you get inside of them and understand, like really develop empathy for this ideal customer, this homeowner Harriet, then you can understand what's going to really resonate with her. So you get into that internal part too. The gold standard is if you can go even one level deep. So you have the external problem, like I'm wasting money, to an internal problem, like, this is frustrating. It's every single month. And like, it's causing me anxiety about saving for my kid's college fund or whatever. But you go to a third level deeper, then it should land. It should be easier. I shouldn't have to work this hard. I shouldn't have to spend this much money and get no results on top of it, which is frankly how sometimes I feel about my house. And right, so so you get to those is ought places where you can really start getting to compelling language. And when you're doing something that is like clean tech, you actually have a little bit of advantage if homeowner Harriet is also a like an environmentally conscious person, because then it's that then she can also say, I shouldn't have to pollute this much just to have a basic standard of living. Like I shouldn't have to have this large of a carbon footprint or whatever it is for Flex R, you know, that it's solving there. So
Yeah. And I want to highlight, like, so you're kind of setting up this person who has this immense amount of pain, this thing that they need to overcome. And when we think of stories, for those of you familiar, I think with Campbell, who had the hero's journey. If you think of, in all the like Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, you pick a movie, the main character, they first make you empathize with them, and then they give you a struggle. And then you're like, I've empathized with this person because I can see who they are, and I understand their pain. They need to throw that ring into Mordor, but it's really heavy. And then hopefully next on the story, you're able to do the whole something with a magic wand.
right.
Yeah.
There's another book that's really great for this formulation too. It's really short and simple, is Donald Miller's Story Brand.
Okay.
And it's no relation, by the way. But it's a very simple, easy book to read. It's the hero's journey. He just repackages it differently. And it's not about startups. It's not about pitching. It's just about creating compelling brand stories. And so it's like, it's the usual 7-step process. You have a character who encounters a problem, and then they meet a guide. That's you. The guide calls them to action, right? And then they helps them avoid failure and achieve some type of success, right? So that basic 7-step process that we see from Star Wars and Lord of the Rings to a startup pitch, it's all the same stuff. And that leads us to like the next thing is like, okay, so we have a customer, we have this problem. Well, you better darn well have a solution, because otherwise, what are we doing here? So now we have to articulate the solution. And then this is where like the homeowner Harriet can play a better role too, is because now we can figure out like what is the end state? How is their life better just for having FlexR in the picture? Like, lower monthly bills, it's a comfortable house, it's feeling good about the environment. I'm making all this stuff up about Harriet, but like whatever those things are, is we can say, oh, well, this is all the big success, and there's probably some failure we're helping them avoid too, right? It's like draining money and having to like pay for their kids' college with loans instead of money in the bank or whatever.
Okay. Now we all like different types of stories and so forth. So you always have to think of the audience. So one thing for if you're an entrepreneur and you're developing a pitch or a story, it's okay to have multiple that are for different audiences. So I want people to remember that. So what are some? So we have different audiences of, let's say, the state government for grants versus a VC that you're pitching to. So what are some things that you need to think about when it's the audience? What are some things that you might need to change up?
Yeah, totally. That's actually a really great point, because a pitch, any pitch to anybody, anywhere, anytime, a pitch by definition is designed to do one thing: change behavior. Like you're trying to get them to do something they would otherwise not have done. And so if you're trying to get a potential co-founder to come on board with you, like that's a very different pitch than trying to get a customer to say yes, which is both of which a very different pitch than trying to get an investor to write you a check, right? So so you have to think first about, who am I talking to and what is the behavior that I want them to change? What do I want to affect right, by this process. And so you start with that, and then you say, okay, so if I'm trying to get a customer to say yes, then this is entirely about, okay, customer, you're the hero, you have this problem, but you know what, we've got some expertise and we've got some empathy, we've been where you are, and we can offer this, this solution. With this solution, you can take it and you can win, right? It's that kind of story. If you're trying to tell a co-founder, it's going to be how amazing their life is going to be being part of this thing that they're building. If you're talking to an investor, it's going to be, well, a win for them is that this grows into something that's major. So they care about Harriet in the context of Harriet being an avatar for a big market that you can go after, but they also care about another story. And this is the story I was alluding to earlier, they care about the story of the business, where you've been, where you are, where you're going, and how you're going to get there, and why now, right? And if you think about like the standard 10-slide startup pitch deck, if you just Google startup pitch deck and click on literally any link, you'll get a standard 10-slide pitch deck. And that standard 10-slide pitch deck is a story arc that you're telling. And most people just don't realize it that way, which is why you end up with like really disjointed pitches. So I think we can think about audience. If we want to like really dive into this, we should probably separate out what audience are we talking about. So where do you want to take it, Thomas?
Well, let's first talk about if you're pitching to fundraise.
Yeah. So this is great. So if you're pitching to fundraise, right, your audience is people who can write checks. And we said we're trying to affect a change in behavior. And if I were to ask you what that change in behavior is, you might say we want them to write you a check. And that's actually not true. When you go and you make a pitch, the outcome of that pitch is not a check. That's not how that works. You're pitching for a second meeting. You're trying to get another meeting with that investor, hoping to end up in due diligence, where upon successful resolution of which you'll get a check, right? So that's the path. And so if you think of like, I have to get everything out all at once so that I can get that check, it's just not the way it works. It's the first conversation. So the behavior change we're trying to get them to go is, this is interesting. I like these people. There might be something here. Let's talk more. That's what you're trying to do. Okay, so that's number one. So that's the behavior we're trying to affect. So then you say, all right, well, who's in the room? This is where you get into a few different things about the investor that are important. So you want to know what they're all about. So investors usually, if you get into the VC land, angels not so much, but if you get into VC land where you're pitching to a fund, right, they have usually some type of what we call a thesis, which is there's a reason that they are putting they're pooling this money together and putting it out into market. They're trying to go after certain kinds of businesses. Those could be certain stages of company, like we only do rounds between this size and that size at this particular stage of company. We're after these particular sectors, or we have this particular social mission. There are all kinds of different things that they say that this is how we invest our money. And because it's a fund, it's not their money, or at least not entirely their money. They had to go tell other people, like, put money in this fund and we'll make money for you, which meant that to get that money, they had to sell someone else on the same thesis. Mm-hmm. So if you come in and you pitch off thesis, like, you're probably not going to do super well, all things being equal. So you want to do research on who you're talking to and understand their thesis. If you're not a good fit for them, like if they're a big, blockchain company, like that's where they're focused, and you're trying to pitch some Flexar, it's probably a lost cause. Like I don't know if I'd recommend even pitching them. You're just wasting everybody's time. But if you have closer alignment, then you want to keep that in mind as you talk to them, that they have something that they're looking for. And you can look at past companies that they've funded. You can look at the other, like their press releases, their social media. They're talking about the stuff that they're interested in. You can do all of that work in advance to say, this is who they are and this is what they're after. And therefore, are we a good fit? That's step number one. And then number two, if we are a good fit, how do I help them see that we're a good fit?
So you're making a story specifically, let's say for this, for this investor and their thesis. And you're designing your story of the customer that elaborates the potential market to kind of match their thesis. Now, for Alex, who's making the Flexar spray on, who is, PhD in material science and a second PhD in chemical engineering, why not? They're very smart. They're super excited because they're pitching to someone who is an expert like them at a VC. Mm-hmm. And they want nothing more to do than talk about the science in their pitch. Because they figure, this person, I can connect with this person because we both like the same things. what is Alex missing when they're going into to pitch it like that?
Yeah, so you're hitting on something interesting. I just want to call out there before I answer the question, which is like what actually is the investor's level of technical knowledge in what you're talking about? Because it's going to be pretty wide. Just because they focus on like clean tech doesn't mean that they have deep expertise in like insulation for homes, particularly spray-on insulation, or the chemical or material science necessary to understand that. They probably don't. And so like you definitely keep that in mind. But let's assume that they are for a moment technically capable of understanding the surface of what you're talking about. Let's even assume that. At that point, it's still not what they mostly care about, right? Like we're going to figure out if this thing, quote unquote, works during due diligence. Like we're going to figure all that out later. You can't prove or disprove it now, though. If you have some studies or science or whatever to back it up, you can certainly call that, hey, we did this study of blah, 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 right? Like that's great, but they don't care about the technical details. And this is really hard for this, for Alex that you're talking about, this, multiple PhD, bright guy, inventor, scientist extraordinaire. We call them technical founders. And we usually, like when we hear technical founder, we think like coder, like, they're the guy who writes the software for a thing, but this is the equivalent in this company. This is the technical person who has conceived of this technology. And the problem with technical co-founders is that they do not have the beginner's mind. They are not where we are. They are steeped in this thing 24/7 to create something amazing. And because they don't know how to come back to where we are, which is nowhere near where they are, and start communicating just this minimum threshold of information that we need, again, to get to another meeting. And so there are lots of techniques that you can do to do that. But the very first thing you do is you say, like, I'm not going to go into all the technical detail. I'm going to have one slide on technical detail and that's it, right? Because you don't need more than that. And, you're talking for 20 minutes at the most, right? So like one slide. Second thing is you say, what can I hand wave away? Like, what of it is not important right now? So if you say we have a chemical that blank, that's probably enough. If you start going into covalent bonds, you're probably going a little bit too deep into the technical knowledge of that. So you can hand wave away. This is really easy as an example for problem statements. And we'll use, like, let's say you're working on a space where this particular clean tech product, this doesn't necessarily apply to Flexer, but like, let's say this is really specific to a particular kind of energy industry. And so it's the people that you're selling to are highly technical. The investors aren't, but the people you're selling to are highly technical and they're in this space. And so the problems of these people are really difficult to understand, right? Unless you're kind of in the space. One thing you can do to try to trick your own brain into simplification is to start a sentence with things like, as you can imagine, because it forces your brain to go back to a position where you can hand wave away a lot of detail. Well, as you can imagine, it's pretty frustrating or as you can imagine, it wastes a lot of time when, right? And because you're starting with, as you can imagine, you have this whole bucket of stuff that you said, I never said, and then I don't have to say. So I'd recommend giving something like that a try. But the important thing is to simplify down as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important, especially for a lot of founders that are really geek out on their technology on it. Another thing that you'll always hear, I think I've heard a lot of VCs say it, and I'd like to kind of hear your feedback on it, where they say like, pitch me something with a realistic expected like total addressable market, where they're like, don't tell me the pie in the sky, just tell me something realistic. How should someone
Yeah.
take that when telling a story?
Well, so you're there, like when we talk about startups, like you're talking about what Alex Blumberg, the founder of Gimlet Media, and he had I forget the podcast that he did on startups, but anyway, he called it a credible theory of hugeness. Right. And it's like three parts there. It's like hugeness is you got to articulate that there is a big there that you can go after. Right. You have to have a theory of how you're going to get that hugeness. And that theory has to be credible, right? Meaning evidence, and it has to make sense on it. So you have to have this like credible theory of hugeness. And so most people think that like, well, if I got this big thing of hugeness, I'm just going to throw out the biggest possible TAM that I can and say like, we can go after all homeowners in the United States. Yay. And then just kind of throw that out there when we all know that that's not true. And that just hurts the credibility part of it. And then we're just like, right? Because we know that it's already crap. And so what you don't want to do is go from there to the other extreme. And the other extreme is where somebody says something like, well, if we just get 1% of the market, right? And it's just like, but you're not going to get 1% of the market. Like, that's also not a thing. So you're just saying like, look at my big numbers, and then just kind of moving on. So what you want to do instead is to actually find where you're entering into the market. These could be your early adopters. It could be the first customer segment that you're going after. It could be your beachhead strategy, it could be whatever it is. But like, there's this initial audience that we're going after, that if you're getting really specific with those ICPs, you should be able to articulate a number that's fairly accurate. Like, that is really reasonable. Like, there are these number of people because we know they look exactly like this. And if that number is compelling in and of itself, and as part of a larger market, that's enough to tell the story that we can go from here inside, and then we'll figure out the rest later.
I kind of equate it to, also your time frame, where if you're pitching to someone for funds, you're asking for funds to do a specific thing. And the clearer you are with that specific thing about how much that initial beachhead, the more likely they're going to give you funds. And then have something that's, hey, 3 years, 5 years later, this is the big pie that we potentially could go after.
Right.
Convince them of the first one with your story, and then say, well, there's something bigger in the future if you just stay tuned and invest in the Series B.
Right. And in terms of story, all of those little things we've been talking about just really connect together, because you're saying that, like, we're talking about an initial customer that you're going to go after right away, because you can't go after everybody. And you're trying to tell the investor we can go after everybody, even though you're trying to get funds to not go after like, you're just creating discordance in your story. Instead, if you just said, we're going after these people, this is what we need to do it. These people are much part of this much bigger market. So like, there's a huge thing there, but 2023, this is what we're doing. It's an easy story.
So if I were to kind of summarize it, it would be, have a very clear story about a very relatable customer that kind of indicates a larger market, so that someone could be like, okay, I can empathize. I want to hear more, and I want to hear your solution, and have a solution that is convincing to the problems that you just described. And make sure that when you're doing this, you're determining whether you're talking to a VC or an institutional investor who wants to hear about their return and their exit. Or if you're pitching it to, a state person, you talk about how many people in the state you're going to be able to help, or but really think about that audience. Is there anything else that you think is kind of on the story that people need to consider?
Well, I think the big summary part of it for me is there's two stories you're always telling. It's like when you watch a movie where they're making a movie, and there's like the movie in the movie, right? Or the play in the play kind of thing. There's always two stories. And you have to keep both in mind. That when we talk about the story of Harriet, because it's the one you're going to use most often, because you could talk like, and you should do this, by the way, like when you're talking to anybody all day long, barista at Starbucks, whatever, you can tell that story and see if it resonates, right? And the more that you practice that, the more at bats that you get, the more repetitions, the better it's going to get. So you're going to have that story of Harriet and her problem and the solution and all that stuff. But that's when you're to an investor, that's embedded. That's a story within the story of the business. And remember that 10 slides forms a cohesive narrative. And you want to make sure that when you're talking about your business, that you are actually forming that cohesive narrative across the 10 slides. You're bringing them on a journey that by the time they're done with that journey, they say, I want that other meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the practice to everyone, to pitch it to your barista and make sure you tip, especially if it's the first time you're telling the story. But I want to also open it up to any people in the audience who might have some questions on the pitch and the story that are here. We have some people. If you can use the raise your hand function, or just take yourself off mute.
Hi, I have a question.
Hey, June.
Hi, how are you, Josh? Hi, everyone. And by the way, we're right now looking for insulation to put under a new roof, because we live in a very old house and we're of that demographic. So I wish there was a spray on insulation. But so I'm talking to customers. The customers are farmers at the farmers market. And I don't even know what to say to them. I just ask them about their product, and to tell me about how they grow it and stuff like that. And I'm just starting to record them. And then I just tell them that we have this startup organic nearby, and I have little cards that I printed up at Walgreens. I think they're awesome. And Josh, could you talk to my problem? Or is it just that I have to just keep talking to people and I'll figure out how to tell a story that they'll enjoy?
Well, it's probably both, but closer to the latter, I think. So here's unfortunately, but here's a couple things. So I heard this, and I was telling Thomas the other day, I heard this interview with Seth Godin, author extraordinaire, and he's got the great blog. And he was, the interviewer asked him, like, you always have these great little metaphors, these great little analogies, these little stories for absolutely everything. How do you come up with these? And he said, well, he said, I'm not any more creative than anyone else. I just run 50 experiments every single day. And so he said, like, he's constantly coming up with these little ways to talk about things, and everybody he talks to all day long, including his barista at Starbucks, right?
I talk to baristas too. No kidding. I hand them the phone. I ask them to look at the startup.
Exactly.
So I get that.
I love it. And anyway, so he's like, so I tell all these stories, and the vast majority of them don't work, but I'm telling 50 of them every day. And so because I tell 50 every day, it's just a numbers game. Some of them work. The ones that work, you end up reading about. The ones that didn't work, you never see. So I just look brilliant, right? And it's the same kind of thing that we need to do, is that we don't have to come up with as many as Seth Godin does. So we're at an advantage there. But if you just start saying, like, I go to the grocery store and I talk to, and I talk to the clerk at checkout. I go to the coffee shop and I talk to, somebody there. Maybe I talk to somebody standing in line. It's not hard at all to come up with a set of 10 people that you can literally pitch to every single day. And you want nothing out of it other than to say, does it land? Does it resonate? Does it make sense? Do you see the whites of their eyes? Right? Do you get that little wow moment, when you're telling them about this? Because if you do, you're onto something, and you can double down. And if not, pivot, move on, try something else. Eventually you'll land on something that's working.
Well, June,
I love that.
One more
thing. I just hope I can remember the story that I told to the person that really loved it.
Well, you're testing little things, like keep them small. Like, don't, unless you're really like doing a really big tipper, then like keep it pretty small. You just a couple of phrases, like try one sentence, 15 seconds, something like that. Write down three, it's one point and 3 supporting sentences. That's it. It's 15 seconds. Try it in advance. See if it works.
And one thing you might try, since you're doing all this testing by talking to farmers, is get them to tell their story. And some of them are, they will tell you a story that will connect really well with farmers. So then you can go and take their story, make some adjustments so that it kind of becomes yours, but retell that story. Because then you're retelling a farmer's story to a farmer.
I love it.
And that's how you're going to really connect with them. Mm-hmm. I see Lewis has his hand up. Lewis, you want to unmute? And
yes, hi, Thomas.
Yeah.
Quick question. So I'm a technical founder, but like the dev part of the technical founder, I'm good, or I think at least I'm rather okay to pitch to people that understand the product. It's in clean tech. It's a HaaS, hardware as a service, but it's complex when you get into details, which investors, VCs, angels want to know about. So maybe, do you have a couple tips for people that are maybe into the more technical part of this, that try to make it maybe a little bit more simpler? Because I feel like I can easily lose someone. Maybe not interest, but at least brain capacity to understand what's going on.
So let me ask a follow-up question, Lewis. So you said that you have a lot of technical detail that your investors want to know about. So the two-part question for that is, how do you know that they want to know that technical detail? And 2, what is the technical detail that they're wanting to know?
Yeah, so for this specific product, it's a win-win for both people that needs heating, or that have an eating problem, or needs eating. But we're pitching to 2 different type of customers. So this is not, are you talking to Are you talking about the VC that wants to know more, or the actual company that wants to be sold to?
Well, you said the problem was that
Like
that you have a highly technical thing and investors want to know the technical detail, but maybe they get lost or lose interest. And so, but you said that they want to know the technical detail. And so I'm curious why you feel that they want to know that technical detail, and like what is the kind, you don't need to like explain the whole product, but like what is the kind of technical detail they're after? Is it how it works? Are they expressing skepticism about your secret sauce? Is it that there's this ecosystem of products and they don't know how they all connect together? Like what's the thing that they're trying to know more about? And why do you think it's that they want to know the technical stuff?
I think it's about the layers of complexity that this project has, or at least where I'm about to pitch is it does not connect with just one type of clients. So usually, you have a startup, you have a product or a service, you're pitching to one specific audience. You said that at the start, right? It's either a niche of a niche of a niche, and you're ultra lucky, or it's way too much of a niche. Ours connect with any computational power company or services. So AI, ML, AR, VR, anybody that needs render farm, whatever, desktop, remote desktop, all of these they need computational power. And then for the rest, we're not pitching them really, because they already here, they're lined up, they need the service. But we need physical space that needs the heating, which we already have. We have a bunch of lists, but they don't need to know the technical details behind. You know what I mean? So we're pitching to people that just need the heating, that don't need the specific complex explanation. But the others that need computational power don't need to know about the heating because they don't care. So we're win-win for both of them. They both don't care about the other. But then when I'm pitching VC, which I barely started, like I'm just like sticking to clean start because I love what you guys talk about, and there's just so many good things to know. But then I'm this is where I am.
If I might make a recommendation, I would utilize case studies and white papers in this case. Because you can go and say, I did a case study and this is how it applies to your problem. And I did a case study and this is how it applies to that problem. And then if someone wants more, they will ask for the case study. That's kind of, as you can imagine, sort of not hand waving it away, but you're basically saying, I have something behind this. And if you want more detail, we can talk about the minutia later. But if you're pitching, you have a finite window to explain why your solution solves this. Josh, did you have any things?
I think I agree with that. I think that's a great suggestion. I think this is probably a case where we can't like this might take a long conversation to try to figure out like all the little pieces there. So to avoid that, I think I would say that depending on who you're talking to, right? So I think there's there's actually three things that I want to say. The first is, and I don't know you, and I don't know your product. You haven't even said the name of it, right? So like I know nothing about this, so I'm going to be extraordinarily bold. Again, shredder. In this particular thing is that I wonder if the complexity is real as opposed to perceived. And if it's more complex than it needs to be, right? So for an early stage startup, most of the time, so founders, all of us, technical and non-technical, have a propensity to overcomplicate their initial product. So, and that includes how our product is represented in the market. So there's all of that, but let's assume that it is exactly as complex as it needs to be. Then the second thing I would say is, depending on the audience and who you're talking to, you want to think in concentric circles of complexity. And so all the way at the center of the circle is deep technical, whatever. It's material science, it's code, it's the hardware, it's schemata, it's all that stuff, deep technical stuff. Maybe during due diligence, an investor will hire somebody to look at that, right? Depending on whatever, but like deep center core. Outside of that, you have probably these things like white papers that explain some of the stuff in more detail that Thomas was talking about. And maybe outside of that, you have case studies. They don't need to be super technical, but they say how it applies to a particular circumstance. If you keep going outside those concentric circles of abstraction around the thing that you're telling, then you get to this outer layer where you're just talking about, we have this thing, customer one, customer two, we serve them value prop one, we serve them value prop two, and that's kind of it, right? And you kind of set the thing down. But there's going to be some, probably if you're talking like super tactical, when it comes to your pitch deck, you're going to have some type of slide that is roughly speaking an ecosystem diagram, right? That's going to show arrows of where stuff is happening and things are doing, that is going to, honestly, the first time you do it, be a hot mess. And and everyone's going to be like baffled and confused by it, which is probably why you want to try it. Maybe present it 1 million cups, just throwing that out there, and then get some feedback and see if you can iterate on that until you get to more and more clarity.
Yeah, I think this is a good point to wrap it up. I want to we kind of bridge into, this is a good time to go check out Eventbrite office hours, which I think you're putting on with Startup Sack, or is that I know you have your office hours, Josh, right?
Yeah, it's separate.
Yeah. Do you have a link? You want to put a link to your office hours in the chat?
Yeah.
So that way people can connect with you. There's also, I have, come grab coffee with me and I can try to point you in the right directions. I'll throw that link in there again. Because, we're here to help everyone kind of move along. And let's see. And with that, I'm just going to wrap this up. I want to first say a big round of applause and thank you to Josh for helping there, everyone. Thank you for attending. Please stay connected with us through email, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. This video is on YouTube. We have an Instagram. It's very boring. Nothing really happens there. Our website and Empower Innovation. Go look it up. It's a network for clean tech companies to stay connected. And I want to thank you for all of our support, SMUD, Blue Tech Valley, and River City Bank, and additional thanks to our overall Clean Start sponsors of Reverent, CMC, Moss Adams, Greenberg, and Traurig, and Weintraub Tobin. And thank you all for attending. And that's all that we have today. All right.